Whew, how y'all doing here? Oh, I see Jan. I won't point out who. I see Jan in the back row. I see some bleary eyes. Mary's doing good. How y'all doing? Everybody's awake. Do some jumping jacks. Get you going. I am not in favor of. I like daylight savings time. I like that. I like the extra hour of light in the evening in the summer as opposed to the morning. That makes sense to me. You know, you go for a picnic and whatnot, but. Oh, they change it. It's earlier than it used to be. And they change it, of course, on Sunday morning, right? You know, I'm going to start a national campaign to get daylight savings time changed so that it would change Monday afternoon at 4 p.m. Right? It's 5 o'clock. See you later, boss, right? I think there's something there. Well, I guess it depends on what we think is important. I guess we've decided that an hour of sleep is less important than other things. An hour of sleep on Sunday morning of all times. Are you all feeling a little blurry-eyed? I know I was this morning. I woke up earlier than I would have anyway. I woke up at 6 as opposed to 6:30 because I was so worried about not waking up. And then last night I was in bed and I was so worried that I wouldn't fall asleep that I stayed up later than I normally would have anyway. So I'm not enough sleep. Fortunately, I've had about 15 cups of coffee, so I don't know who you are, I don't know who I am, but this is fun, right? It's a sort of weird in-between world. It's a weird in-between world where we don't know who or what or where we are. Our lives are like that. Our lives are like that. We're full of transitions constantly. And in our increasingly mobile society, which we discussed briefly in adult education, in our increasingly mobile society, which I think used to refer to people driving in cars, but also refers to phones nowadays, we are constantly in transition. I was born in Philadelphia, lived in Colorado Springs, grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, went to high school in Stillwater, went to college in St. Paul, did a year of grad school in Madison, lived in Scotland, did seminary in Chicago, lived in Kansas for almost 5 years, now I live in Minnesota. Like, where am I from? I don't know. I guess I'm from Minnesota, but I'm not really sure where I'm from. Some of you, like the Ponson farm, have been here as long as there have been farms here, and other folks in this church have been here for, someone's pointing. Some people in this, the Anthony's have been here for a long time too, yeah. So some families have been around for a long time, and some of us are new. Who are we? Who are we? It's confusing. We live in transitional spaces increasingly. And our identities are formed and reformed as we move and travel between spaces. We've been thinking a lot about the Ukraine this past week as they have suffered this crisis, a change in leadership and government from a pro-Western to from a pro-Russian to a pro-Western leader, which has precipitated the Putin regime, the Putin government, for putting troops on the ground in Crimea, a predominantly ethnic Russian area, also an area of strategic interest to Russia. And once again, we find ourselves in a situation where that middle part of Europe is uncertain to whom it belongs, right? A little more geography this morning. There's always been this conflict in Europe between the big central landmass of Europe, Russia, and then Western Europe, which has gained its power through sea trade and travel over the oceans and naval military power. And then there's countries in the middle like Ukraine and Poland, which have been what in geography they call buffer states, states that are pulled one way or the next as they try to figure out who has the power and the stability to lead into the future. Another buffer state in the Bible is Israel, right? You have the major power centers. You have Egypt with the Nile. You have the Euphrates and the Babylonian and Assyrian empires. You have the sea-going empires of Greece and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. You had the Persians at one point, And as those powers gained and lost power and influence, little Israel, which is just this little tiny bitty country on some hills in between with no real major economic or military base to speak of, had to guess which major political power it was going to line up with. Transitional identities all the time. This kind of transitional and contested identity was an issue for early Christians and an issue for Jesus. To whom do we belong? To whom do we belong? Which empire are we going to choose to live under? Which sphere of influence, Europe or Russia, will we choose? What time zone are we in? Who are we? What does the Bible say about our fundamental identity? Jesus is tempted in the wilderness of Judea for 40 days and 40 nights. And afterwards he was famished, and the tempter, which is the role of the devil in the Bible, the tempter, came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." Stones to bread. Stone soup, perhaps. Stones to bread. What kind of identity do we have within our economic system? If you're a person, an adult, a lot of times people will ask you, what do you do? Like they'll say, what's your name? And you say, oh, my name is Rob. And then they say, well, what do you do? What do you do for a living? And that gives you a sense of who you are, a sense of identity. But in the back of their minds, they're also asking, how much do you make? How successful are you? How smart are you? Right? We gain our sense of identity from our work, especially for men, but also for women. And then one day, you turn 65 years old, and you retire, and you give up being the dentist, or the electrician, or the teacher, or the preacher, and someone introduces you to someone, and they say, oh, this is Rob, he's retired now. And that sense of self is lost, that sense of belonging and purpose in the world. Is our sense of self constructed by our economic activity? And is that sense of self one that can be sustained when we are unemployed or laid off or retired? Is that really who we are? Jesus answered the tempter, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down." Religion, the temple. And we're talking about Jesus, right? And yet here the devil is tempting Jesus with religion. It's a funny little story. Shouldn't Jesus have thrown himself down to prove to the devil who he is? But he doesn't. How is it that religion and our sense of religious identity can shift and change and inform who we are, but also lead us astray? How many of us here in this room grew up something other than Presbyterian? Like practically 2/3 maybe? 2/3 of people in this room, right? And maybe there are people who grew up in this church, Presbyterian, who are now Methodists or Congregationalists or don't go to church at all. Is our sense of who we are tied up with our faith? And what do we do if our thoughts about faith, if our theology, if our beliefs change as we mature, which they always do? As a child, we may have believed in a very certain kind of concise God. And as we age, our understanding of God may mature and become more complex and more nuanced. Does that change who we are as persons? Are there ways in which religious identity is abused in our political discourses? That people talk about us as being Christians in a way which is damaging to our sense of who we are as individuals and as communities and as a nation. Our religious identities are transitional too. We are tempted to test God, but Jesus said to the tempter, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." And again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and he said to them, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Political power. Political power. And our identity as political beings. Democrats and Republicans. Tea Party, Libertarians. Who's that, the 99%? What political party do you belong to? How do you vote? You know, here at Union Presbyterian Church, we're very polite, and I notice we don't ask ourselves thorny political questions very often. But sometimes things get nasty in politics, don't they? And they have been in our country for a while. We insult each other as opposed to engaging one another in conversation. We've forgotten the art of civil discourse, of thoughtful conversation. We're sometimes more worried about being a conservative or being a liberal or being a moderate than we are in actually serving our country or serving one another. Political identity. And plus that changes too, right? My parents have changed political parties. I won't tell you from where to where, but they changed. Worship, said Jesus. Worship the Lord your God and serve only him. We live in an uncertain world. We don't know what time it is. We don't know where we are. We don't know what we're doing. But in all that, transition and uncertainty, our sense of truly who we are is rooted in something and someone much deeper than the economics or the religiousness or the politics of our time. Jesus is tempted in chapter 4 at the very end of chapter 3 in Matthew. It says that Jesus came from Galilee to John by the Jordan, and Jesus went down into the water, and suddenly the heavens were opened up to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." Who is Jesus? The Son of God. Who are you through your baptism into Christ? Children of God. No matter what. No matter your economic status, your work status, your legal status, your religiousness, your lack of religiousness, your doubts, your faith. No matter whether you're healthy or sick, on time or late, whether you pledged or forgot, you are children of God. And Lent is a time to remember who and whose we truly are.